let's take a stroll down memory lane and talk about one of the most iconic devices of all time, the iPod. Apple changed the music world with the iPod, and today we're going to dive into the details of the iPod video, as well as how it evolved across its generations. From the early days of the iPod Classic to the 2005 iPod video, this little plucky device shaped how we consume media and ultimately helped Apple become the powerhouse of technology it is today. We can't talk about the iPod video without first mentioning its early predecessors, the classic models. Launched in 2001, the first iPod was an absolute game changer. It featured a mechanical scroll wheel, and some of you will remember that click. It had 5GB of storage, which was absolutely massive for the time. But as the iPod grew, it went through multiple generations. The second generation in 2002 added a touch-sensitive wheel, and was the first iPod to feature firewire syncing for faster data transfers. Over the next couple of years, Apple kept improving the iPod, boosting storage and adding features like song ratings and equalizer settings. Then came the third generation iPod in 2003, which introduced a new, sleeker design with the all-important touch wheel, a huge leap forward in the user experience. But what made the iPod truly special was how Apple began incorporating videos into their platform. By 2005, music and video were no longer separate entities, and Apple would soon make a major leap forward. Enter the iPod video, the game changer, more formally known as the iPod 5th generation video. In 2005, Apple introduced the iPod with a 2.5-inch colour screen capable of displaying video. This was absolutely huge. Before the iPod video, people had to rely on DVDs or tiny portable screens, but the iPod made it all available in your pocket. The 5th gen Classic featured up to 60GB of storage, and it was the first to have the ability to play full-length movies, TV shows, and music videos. Yeah, that's right, we're talking about full-on video playback. The iPod officially became a multimedia device from that day on. The screen quality was pretty impressive for its time. Definitely wasn't 4K, but for a device that fits in your hand, the display was vibrant, clear, and you could watch movies or shows on the go. Plus it had a decent battery life, about 14 hours for music and 3 to 4 hours for video, although we all know how iPod batteries age. On the flip side, it did have its downsides. Whilst you could store a lot of video content, the video quality wasn't always stellar, especially on higher bitrate content. The battery life was definitely a weak spot when you're watching TV or movies, and the price point of around $350 or £250 was very steep at the time. While the iPod video was booming, Apple didn't forget about people who wanted more portability, and the iPod Nano was first released in 2005. Unlike the size of the Classic, the Nano was thin, compact, sleek, and offered the same great experience in smaller, more pocket-friendly design. It also featured the clickwheel, which was a trademark of iPod devices at the time. It was tiny, and you could easily slip into your pocket. Solid-state flash memory was remarkable at the time and meant faster access times, no moving parts, meaning that if you dropped it, you didn't lose everything. The Nano was also cheaper, which made it more accessible for a larger audience. But it wasn't all roses, because the Nano had that tiny screen, and whilst it could handle video, the experience was far from immersive compared to what we have nowadays. Plus it had lower storage capacity, so you couldn't really load it up with movies and music in the same way you could the Classic. And in 2007, Apple took the big leap with the iPod Touch, basically giving us a phone, minus the phone part. The iPod Touch introduced the world to apps, and suddenly you had a pocket-sized iPod that could do way more than just play music and videos. The touch interface, the Wi-Fi, and the ability to run apps, browse the internet, made the iPod Touch feel like a prototype of some of the smartphones we have today. However, by now smartphones were starting to dominate, and the iPod Touch began to feel less relevant. Even though it was cool for gaming and media, it didn't have the same appeal as the iPhone to adults. Slowly but surely, the iPod family began to fade into history. By 2014, the iPod Classic was officially discontinued, marking the end of an era. The iPod had lived a good life, but it just couldn't keep up with the rise of smartphones. Music streaming services that we have nowadays, like Spotify and Apple Music, made dedicated music players less essential, and the iPhone combined everything you needed: music, videos, photos, and a phone, all in one device. In 2022, Apple made it official by discontinuing the iPod Touch, the last remaining iPod model to be sold by Apple. The iPod officially became a thing of the past. While the iPod is a relic, and I know that many of us are still trying hard to keep it alive, its legacy will live on with the music and media devices we use every day. So if you've got an old iPod tucked away somewhere, maybe it's time to bring it back out. You never know, it might just remind you of how cool it was to watch movies on a tiny screen back in the day.